Welcome to lecture 2 of the series. So in this lecture, we'll be looking at the elements of memory. What makes a thing memorable? So before delving into the elements of memory, we first have to understand how our brain works. So I'm going to give you a small exercise. So let's think of a banana. Now, when you think of a banana, what did you see? Did you see the word banana in your head? That's almost certainly not, right? Most people see the image of a banana, or the smell of the banana, or the taste or feel its taste in their mouth, right? Because our brain thinks in images and associations. You seldom think in words, right? Words are not natural to the brain. Words are sort of a new invention in the history of human development. So sensory information, right? Mostly images are how our brains think. But in the natural world, we do not see words, right? Reading itself in lexicon and in letters and alphabets, this is a learned skill that we learn from the age of 6. In the real world, we think in images, we see images, we see objects. We will go on to exploit this fundamental observation a little bit later. We have to continue with this thought experiment of how trains of thought and associations typically work. So when we think of something, say we think of school, right? When we think of school, it might trigger memories and ideas associated with school. I have some teachers hurt you. I have some friends, some colleagues, and other experiences, right? So this is how our brain works. We tend to think of a single idea. Then that idea triggers another idea. Then that idea triggers another idea, which is associated with the previous idea, right? This seems to be the stream of the train of thought, right? It's association and images. And the brain typically thinks in these trains of associations. Right? We think of one subject or one thing, and subjects associated with it tend to trigger other subjects and associations. So it's much easier to learn something. We already have an existing association. We can easily build on that foundation. And this is how education works. Well, you start with the fundamentals. If you master the fundamentals, it's much easier to learn other ideas and build on that. But it's harder to learn something when you don't have pre-existing associations, the fundamentals already embedded, right? And so this is how our trains of thought typically work. And I'll show you a mind map just to visualize how this sort of thing works. So now, let's just take a look at a mind map here. So a mind map on the right side. What do mind maps do? Now, mind maps visually represent how the brain thinks. They can also be a powerful learning tool, right? Those are connected using branches that are reminiscent of neuronal connections. One thought, the central image, may trigger one train of thought. So let's take a look at this. The central image is what mind map lures. So when we think of mind map, we may think of paper. Well, mind map must be on paper. Well, what type is paper? Well, the paper must be blank. The paper is typically oriented in landscape orientation. The paper may be A3 or A4 to draw the mind map. And we may think of a mind map. Well, the mind map has branches as well. So the branches must emanate or radiate from the center, where would the branches towards the center being thicker and those further away being thinner. Right? And then we think of pictures, right? Some of the main branches might have a picture, an image associated with it. You might think of words from the center, and we have one word per branch, for instance. So this is how it works. We think of an idea, and we think of associations associated with that idea. We think of an idea, we think of associations that are associated with that idea, and so forth and so on. But this is how the brain typically works, right? Our brain works with neuronal connections, right? Neurons that fire together, wire together. I think that's a famous saying in neuroscience. But that would be beyond the scope of this particular lecture. But I think you get the idea. Think of an idea, and that idea triggers other ideas associated with it. This is how our brain works. Not only that, our brain also works in images. It's much easier. It's much easier to think in images than it is to think in words and lexicons. Now that the fundamental principles of how the play works have been firmly established, you'll now talk about the power of imagination. So our brains tend to remember things that are highly emotionally salient, right? Ridiculous things are more easily remembered. Just like how controversial and almost unbelievable stories tend to capture people's attention. Right? You think of the news, right? The news stories that make headlines are the ones that truly grab attention. Those are the ones that trigger or just mess with our emotional states, so to speak, because they're controversial, right? So the things that really capture brain's attention and imagination are what? Things that are funny, ridiculous, large, small, violent, sexual, many, right? Many, right? That is saying numerous, right? We have many things, number, right? Things that have rhythm. So rhythm captures our attention as well. Movement captures our attention. Things that are three-dimensional, right? These are much more easily remembered than things that are just two-dimensional, right? These are things that grab the mind's attention. They can have very strong impression on the human mind. And we will use this, we will exploit this idea when we talk about memory techniques. Later, we have a fundamental theoretical understanding of how the mind works. We'll now use a certain memory technique called the story technique to memorize all of these 8 items. So we're going to memorize coffee mug, scissors, spoon, umbrella, pen, eyeglasses, toothbrush, body towels. So brace yourselves. Okay. So we're going to come up with a story to remember all of these items creatively. Right? So let's start off with these first 4 items: a coffee mug, scissors, spoon, and umbrella. So let's visualize. So in the heart of a city, right? So in the heart of a city, a monstrous, evil pair of scissors stirs a colossal cup of coffee mug with an enormous silver spoon. Okay, this is just a visual aid and a guide. Right? It doesn't have to look like this anthropomorphic. We'll think of this as a huge pair of scissors rather than what looks like an insect, right? And we can think of this as like the spoon, because, I want you to imagine the spoon's shining colors. Think of it as shining, as glistening, right? And I want you to see the deep brown hues of the coffee, the metallic sheen on the scissors, right? And the way the liquid swirls violently, right? And it's all splashing onto the streets of this city, right? The giant coffee mug, right? Right? The swelling liquid churns violently until it spills over, crashing into the streets below, shattering the pavement and sweeping away unsuspecting civilians. Right? Hundreds of people scramble for cover beneath a massive umbrella, huddling together in panic. So you can think of all these crowds. You can hear the screams and this chaotic scene, and they're all running towards this very large umbrella that's also splashing, dripping with coffee. The coffee's dripping from this umbrella, right? Right? It's certainly much easier to remember now. It's much easier to remember the items: coffee, scissors, spoon, and umbrella. Right, now let's move on to the next part of the story. Well, suddenly, right, as you're standing on the street and witnessing this crazy chaotic scene, suddenly, like, the ground trembles. From deep underground, razor-sharp fountain pens burst up with piercing through the asphalt, shooting towards the sky like massive missiles, right? So think of it, hear the sound. You see all of these pens rising forth from the pavement, shooting through the cups, shattering it, right? The coffee spilling all over, right? Incorporate as many senses as you can. Hear the sound, so smell the top, right? Taste the coffee, and splashes out to your tongue, right? They strike the towering coffee cup, puncturing its sides, cracks spread rapidly before the cup shatters entirely, unleashing tidal waves of streaming coffee that floods the city. So imagine that. It's flooding the city and this coffee is moving towards you. So you have barely any time to react, right? Before this scattering splash hits your face and your eyeglasses. So imagine yourself wearing these eyeglasses, right? You're blinded for a moment, Remember that you had an oversized, a very large toothbrush tucked into your pocket. So without hesitation, you whip it out and start scrubbing um, your eyeglasses clean with this toothbrush. So imagine scrubbing it, and then you see the scratches on your glasses that you're trying to scrub your eyeglasses clean. Now finally, right, as you slip your eyeglasses back on, your vision clears just in time to witness a surreal sight. You look up into the sky, and countless tau tumbling from the sky, drifting down like parachutes to soak up the disastrous spills, so they splashing down onto the pavement, right? Absorbing all of this coffee and all of this mess that was made by this evil scissors that was stirring this ginormous cup of coffee earlier, right? Excellent work. Now, what remains is that we should review the story. Right? You know the story. So in the heart of a city, the master's prayer for evil singers, there's a colossal cup of coffee with an enormous spoon. The swirling liquid churns violently until it spills over, crashing onto the streets below, shattering the pavement and sweeping away unsuspecting civilians. Hundreds of people scramble to cover beneath a massive umbrella, huddling together in panic. Right? Suddenly the ground trembles. From deep underground, razor-sharp fountains burst upward, right? Piercing through the asphalt and shooting towards the sky like missiles. They strike the towering coffee cup, puncturing its sides. Crack spread rapidly before the cup shatters entirely, unleashing a tidal wave of screaming coffee that floods the city. You barely have any time to react before a scalding splash hits your face. And your eyeglasses, blinded for a moment, you remember you had this oversized toothbrush that was tucked into your pocket. And without hesitation, you whip it out and scrub your eyeglasses clean. And you whip them back on, your vision clears just in time to witness a surreal sight where we have these countless towels that are tumbling from the sky, drifting down like parachutes to soak up the disastrous spill. And I hope that this exercise has helped you remember all of these items. And remember, in the story, incorporate all your five senses, incorporate movements, incorporate color, incorporate smell, incorporate three-dimensional images, right? Incorporate exaggeration, right? Incorporate number. Perhaps you see massive numbers of crowds that are scrambling towards this very large umbrella. And this is the fundamental basis of memory. And now that you've done that, I want you to review, I want you to list these items on a pad of paper and pencil. Right? Just review them, just write them down, see how many you can remember. Right? For 90% of people, you should be able to remember all of these items if you just remember this ridiculous story. Excellent. Now I'm going to go through a review right after this highly stimulating exercise. Should be able to test how many of these items you can recall. And if there's a problem, right, if there's an item that you missed, right, try to add more sensation, try to add more color, try to add more movement. And this is the basis of memory. Now, let us summarize the elements of memory that have been introduced here, right? So for the elements of memory, to make something memorable as possible, you have to use imagination. You have to use association. You have to use exaggeration, make things large, contraction, things that are very small seem absurd, right? They just grab our attention, right? You have to use order, sequence, number, right? Substitution. These are very important elements of memory. Right? When we think of something, memory tends to be ordered, right? Basically, I think there are a few philosophers who made this observation. You have to incorporate touch, smell, sight, hearing. Right? These are your fundamental Aristotelian senses. You have to use sexuality, right? Sexuality is much more easy to remember because it's so ridiculous. It really sticks in memory because sexuality, absurdity, humor, right? Make things humorous, make the story ridiculous and humorous. Color, right? It's much more easier to remember information when it has color. That's why we say highlight your notes, right? Use pictures, use rhythm, right? Rhythm, movement, taste, right? Three-dimensional images again. To reiterate, are much more easy to remember the two-dimensional notes. By incorporating all of these elements and practicing during your training, right? Practicing incorporating these images will make your memory all the more stronger, all the more lasting. Right? So these are the elements of memory. And finally, just as an add-on and as a bonus, right, former world champion Ben Furthermore produced a music video called "Give It Back" with DJ Shadow, and I think it was Little Dragon, right? And there's a source which I linked here, as also in the notes of this course, so in the printable version of this. And I highly recommend that you view it, as it may help motivate you, activate enthusiasm, by showing you witness a former world champion of memory, Ben Furthermore, using images and associations. Remember, a deck of playing cards. And now, in the next lecture, we will explore another memory method called the link system, where two images are linked at a time in pairs, right? And using these pairs, we'll be able to link other images. It's very similar to the story system. We'll see that in the very next lecture. Thank you very much.